Where does the fight for justice take place? Arm in arm as we march the streets for change? In sanctuary, where books ignite words of power? Where a single hand raised can turn the chapter on our future? Teach, I say, because education is our right. Teach, I say, because when they see you, they see themselves. Teach because giving back moves us forward. Teach, my friends, because teaching is revolutionary.
I didn't have my first black male teacher until my first year in college, and that was actually a math professor. I was underperforming as a mathematician then, and it was just very life-changing for him to sit there as a black man to another black man saying, you have a future and you're destined for greatness, so let's get on that path. And so that's when life clicked for me. So I just imagine if I had that when I was younger, how much more serious I probably would have took school. They tell you that if a kid has one black male educator, they'll make it to college, right? But my kids have had me for 3 straight years, so they should be taking over the world now.
Hello, Sharif. How you doing?
It is so good to see you. Good to be here. I'm excited about this conversation.
I am too. In fact, I know for some folks, you might not have had the chance to see that first video. So what I'll do in my introduction and walking you through all things on the insights of the Black male educator experience is I will give you some more information about DonorsChoose. So don't be worried about having missed perhaps a little bit of audio there. A quick logistical note before we officially get started here. As you are engaging with our session today, please feel free to add your questions, your comments. Perhaps like you, Sharif, I was raised in a call and response culture. And so we thrive on this idea of throwing in these interjections that sort of speak to you or items where you have questions. So we really encourage you that if you're on the Whova app, go ahead and add them into the Q&A and chat feature. And then if you're on YouTube Live, you can add those items into the chat. And with that, hello, everybody. My name is Kristina Joye Lyles. I go by Steen, and I lead the work to make DonorsChoose a force for racial equity in public schools across the country. And at DonorsChoose, our vision is for every student in every community to be equipped with the educational experience that they need to achieve their dreams. And yet, I imagine if you're here today, you know that all too often, the most marginalized and the most minoritized students don't have that access. And the work that I lead is really to identify those barriers, to collaborate across the sector, to break them down, and then to really wield our org's power for good. And part of our work with the Center for Black Educator Development and our Male Teacher of Color study has been one example. And to that end, I am so delighted to be joined by, I guess this may be a partner in equity, not a partner in crime, but the co-author of the study at the Center for Black Educator Development, led by the one and only veteran educator and activist, Sharif El-Mekki. Welcome, Sharif. Why don't you start in your intro by telling us, tell us about the center, and then also tell us why you said yes to this collaboration with DonorsChoose.
Absolutely. It's great to be here again. Thank you all for joining us. Sharif El-Mekki, I was a teacher and a principal for 26 years. I launched the Center for Black Educator Development to help rebuild a national Black teacher pipeline. So we're in cities all across the United States. And to rebuild the Black teacher pipeline, we look at it as 3 pillars: policy and advocacy, professional learning. Then the largest part of our work is around pathways, engaging high school students in career technical education courses, CTE courses, to learn what does it mean to teach and what does it mean to teach well, drawing from Black pedagogical frameworks. And as our friend Dr. Koso Lassane talks about, Black teaching traditions. So doing that, being able to expose them. And then also we have a paid apprenticeship model for high school and college youth, to join the Black Teacher Pipeline. So why I chose to partner with you on this really, really monumental study, Steen. One reason, as a principal, my teachers would apply to DonorsChoose. So I was very familiar with the impact that DonorsChoose has in the sector. We were beneficiaries across several years, many projects, I would say tens of thousands of dollars, ranging from books to trips to scientific supplies. And so there was always a very important, distant partner, more of a beneficiary. And so not only was it a unique opportunity to partner with you and DonorsChoose in this work, but also my career started as a Black man teacher, and I was very, very intrigued about what people in the field would say today. What were these Black men experiences like? And that was just too fascinating to my curiosity lens to pass up. So the opportunity to do that, and of course, it ties directly into our work of rebuilding a national Black teacher pipeline that addresses recruitment, support, and retention. So I think there are, at least three major reasons that just felt like an absolute no-brainer, and we were absolutely honored to participate in it.
Well, the pleasure was certainly ours, and I'd be remiss to not flag. I mean, it's Valentine's Day, so this is in many ways a love letter to our teachers, a love letter to Black men in the classroom. And what you're going to hear us talk about as well in the study is something that Sharif just mentioned, which is aspects of recruitment, aspects of retention. And if you are intrigued by what you just heard Sharif share, I cannot wait to now dive into the ins and outs of this study, which you see from the screen is centering on the experiences of Black men in the teaching profession. And so with that, Sharif, I'm going to dive right into this study. And I'll flag one additional note here. What you're going to see very soon is some slides that indicate what it is that we ask teachers across the country about their classroom experiences, data analyzing what we heard, and then you're going to also hear Sharif do some contextualizing and putting some narrative behind some of the studies and the data. And so let's dive in then. What we are essentially about to do is really share the culmination of thousands of teachers answering in-depth survey questions about what they are experiencing in the classroom. And the survey design and the survey questions was the product of racial equity leaders devising those questions and design, and is the work of so many of my colleagues at DonorsChoose. And here's how it all began. So years ago on DonorsChoose, we started inviting teachers to share their racial identity as well as other demographic information with us as a part of registering on our platform. The way that DonorsChoose works is that teachers across the country in public schools, K through 12, have resource needs for their students: pencil cases, laptops, butterfly cocoons, field trips, and they come to DonorsChoose to request those needs. We vet those classroom needs through our platform. We have donors across the country fund those classroom needs, and then we ship those resources directly to the classroom. And so as we think about then what we are collecting on that previous screen here, we have now had, and this is just with respect to the survey question that we asked teachers upon registration, more than 700,000 teachers having shared their demographic information with us. So looking back here, we're talking about teachers sharing their racial identity, teachers sharing their gender identity, when it was they began teaching, their college alma mater, and even questions around if they were the first in their family to graduate from college. In just a few minutes, when we talk about this survey, you'll learn more about how this opened up a beautiful Pandora's box of an ability to slice and dice data in ways that we really began to get underneath some of the nuances of the Black male teaching experience. What this means then, with the over 700,000 teachers who have shared their demographic information with us on DonorsChoose, is that we've created the largest email contact list of teachers of color across the country. And what this has done is allow for us to not just support these educators in the resources that they need for their students, but to listen to and learn from our teachers of color at a whole new scale. And so The survey that we're talking about today, the study that we're talking about today, was completed by thousands of teachers, including white teachers and female teachers of color, as well as about 1,700 male teachers of color. So methodology-wise, we're talking about roughly 1,700 male teachers of color in a universe of 5,200 survey respondents, making this the largest ever survey centering this group of educators. And some of our findings quantify trends that the sector has been talking about for years. And I also think that some of these findings might surprise and intrigue you. And if you're wondering why our focus then on Black male teachers, for one, we all know that they are profoundly underrepresented in the sector. Some numbers put that at just under now 2% of our country's Black male teachers are in the classroom in public schools. And for another reason for why we centered this group, our survey data underscored that the Black male teaching experience is unique. So we set out to learn about male teachers of color more broadly, and we happened upon a finding that was mostly unique for Black men in the classroom. And so all of this, coupled with the climate that our teachers are experiencing, the disproportionate responsibilities they're shouldering, the unique values that they bring into the classroom, the rich environment created by these educators, all of this plays a role in their decisions to stay or leave the profession. And so I want to present my own little drum roll here, because we're now going to hear, what did we learn when we asked 1,700 men of color in the classroom? What did they tell us? Here's the first finding. Part of the reason, right, that we want to recruit and retain Black men in the profession is because of an instinct, right, that these educators bring unique value to the job. And our first finding really seems to quantify this instinct. And what we see here is that Black male teachers report spending an average of 4.6 hours a week tutoring students and 5.4 hours mentoring students outside of class time. And that is more than any other teacher demographic. And we see that Black male teachers have more students hanging out in their classrooms outside of regular class time. And that is more than any other teacher demographic. So later, we're going to talk about the role of the invisible tax and potentially burdens that are placed on teachers of color. But what surprised us, and maybe what relieved us here, Sharif, is that teachers who reported higher numbers or greater student engagement on these questions were no more likely, and in fact, they were slightly less likely to report feeling burnt out. And so that seems like a ironic finding. You're spending more time with students, you're spending more time outside of class time, and yet you're saying, but I'm actually less burnt out as a result. Do you mind sharing a bit about what you think is going on here?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is one of the, not only fascinating aspects of this study, but it also deeply reflected my own experience as a classroom teacher. And I think, as a school principal, teacher retention, teacher wellness, satisfaction, burnout rates were something that we were very sensitive to, and we were really, constantly trying to inquire about. And interesting enough, working directly with students was not in the top 10 reasons that our teachers would share with us. It was more or less around the paperwork and things like that administrative duties that may drain them. But I think working directly with students actually fueled them in a lot of different ways. And I imagine this is what the respondents were sharing, that I signed up. My passion is to work with students, to help the next generation, to lift as I climb, as Mary Church Terrell used to say. And so that invigorated the work, as opposed to some of the other more tedious, mundane, activities that were required of them, that they could not draw a direct connection between that and student performance, that and building relationships, that and student achievement, where they could see this actually is helping my students. And it's actually helping me as an educator connect as well.
Let's talk about that fuel then, because I'm hearing something else that is emerging with respect to the classroom environment and what might be fueling. And so here's another finding that was fascinating to us, which is Graduates of historically Black colleges and universities, so HBCUs, seem to show the greatest engagement with students of all. And we showed this finding to Dr. Michael Lomax and the team at UNCF, and they mentioned that they see this as quantifying what they call the HBCU effect, right? That there's proof that if you went to a college where the environment was affirming, you had Black professors who mentored you, then you're much more likely to pay it forward and to seize opportunities to be a mentor yourself. And I say this actually wearing my Spelman blazer. I'm not sure if you can see, I'm a Spelman grad, married to a Howard grad, and this idea of affirming environments created in an HBCU is something that I know well. And I want to sort of dovetail this into some additional findings and then capture what you might see here as well, Sharif. So we had that finding then, HBCU educators seeming to show incredible engagement with students in terms of number of students and hours spent. We also found that teachers of color are more likely to have entered the profession because they wanted to teach a curriculum that affirms the identities of students of color. And Black male teachers were more likely than any other group to cite this as their motivation to becoming an educator. And so I want to sit here just for a second because I think we are in times where this idea is one that is either politicized or brought into an area where we want to think through the implications of the curriculums taught in classrooms and what that might do for teachers of color who are sort of entering the profession because of a desire here. And so, Sharif, then, one more motivation that we then see with respect to a teacher's age more so than their race. And that motivation is seeing teaching as quote unquote social justice work. And so we asked teachers on the left, hey, like, I see teaching as social justice work. Like, let's talk about, you know, what you think about that question. Of teachers who started teaching after 2010, so after the year 2010, 62% strongly agreed that I became a teacher because I see teaching as social justice work. And for teachers who entered the profession before then, fewer were motivated by this idea as teaching as social justice work. What is your reaction to this and to even some of the prior findings? And what do you think districts should be doing with this data?
Yeah, no, this is also very, very compelling. And particularly when we look at this national drive to not only increase the number of teachers that we have, but also to diversify them as well, to ensure that they have a level of cultural proficiency, that they are adept at building relationships with not only students, but communities that they serve in. You know, and so this is really interesting because when I think about the early 90s, that's when I entered the teaching profession. And there was a very pervasive narrative that teachers, educators writ large, should really be colorblind. And they should really flatten experiences. They should really try to approach it as if no one has a different experience, that no student, has a need for more equitable practices within the classroom, school, or district. And I think what people are starting to see is like, no, actually equity and racial justice work is actually an integral part of not only the students, but also the educators, the teachers themselves. And I also think this may be because these happen in waves, because I would say even before the 90s, in the 70s, the late 60s and the 70s, there was a connection between educational justice and racial justice as people, as teachers were approaching the profession. They were entering because this was the kind of ending of the formal timeline version of the civil rights movement, where people started entering the teaching profession and they were connecting the dots between educational justice and racial justice. And then there was this backlash, like, no, ignore that. Everyone's the same. There's no need for equity. There's no need to look at things differently. And so I think not only is there more research, more understanding, more in-depth, rigorous study to people understanding that, but I also think there's a backlash from students who experience being erased in these color blindness and then they said, no, I was erased. No, I did not receive the education that I think I should have. No, here's the inequitable practices that I experienced as a student, and now I'm entering the profession and I think about it differently. My paradigm and orientation is changed, not only because of the times and the kind of the unfortunate, as you mentioned, like politicized aspect of curricula development and teaching, but also from their lived experiences.
I'm resisting the urge to sit here, mostly because there's something you're sharing that I even see as a future opportunity for the field to really deeply understand precisely what you're sharing in terms of the student experience, which again, this is not a novel idea to Steen or to Sharif, right? This idea of the cyclical nature of there not being a whole lot that's new under the sun. We sort of look at your own student experience, why you become an educator, what you do in the classroom, how those students are feeling about what's happening in the classroom, what they're learning, and then they want to become educators. So I'm actually really curious about 10 years of this data, 15 more years of this data, 50 more years of this data, and what we might see with respect to the student experience and how that impacts how they show up in the classroom. And so I'm really curious about how districts might think through recruitment strategies for what entices someone to become a teacher based on the demographics they need in their districts.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And when you look at that, and even I think there's so many social factors that districts can look at, research, and I agree with you. The more and more research and study and really inquiring about that, even what does it mean to go to an integrated school versus one that's not so integrated? What does it mean to have Black teachers? What does it mean to not have any and to be longing for them? And what does it mean to go from a district or a school where you have very limited Black educators, Black teachers, and then you attend an HBCU? What does that experience now? How does that inform if you do become an educator, right? Like, so there are all these factors, social factors and personal factors that can really, color our experience, our perspective, and our mindset. And so I'd be very curious to continue these conversations with youth, as well as high school students, which is part of our work.
Right. We can't see the chat just yet, but I'm certainly hoping that you all are lighting it up either with affirmation of your own student experiences or ideas or thoughts or questions you might have that you'd hope to ask educators today in the classroom, what it is that they need to thrive, and how it is that they are incorporating sort of a social justice aspect to their work, knowing it was the motivation to join in the first place. Just to give one piece of fun narrative, I think stories are always important in this work. The stories are really made up of who I am and how I'm here. So much of my background is in the law, and my motivation for joining the law was to think through ways in which I see myself, I am represented, and both in my clients and the work that I used to do. And as I think about day in and day out, I looked for ways to reinforce that exact reason why I was there. And so what does it look like for teachers in the environment of, I teach because it's social justice work. What about today's climate allows or disallows for that to happen? And how might that affect the pipeline to come? Okay, let's talk about when now. So we're going to shift gears into when it is that someone is inspired to become a teacher. And the data show that gender seems to be the strongest predictor here, more so than race, with male teachers of all racial identities showing or deciding much later in life to pursue teaching as a profession. What do you think here?
Listen, this is like you, I was on my way to law school until after I graduated from college. And interesting enough, in 2014, started working with a group of Black men, Dr. Will Hayes amongst them, who I called in to help mentor just some young Black teachers and educators who were reaching out and saying like, hey, listen, I'm thinking about leaving the profession. I think I need to do something else. I'm not feeling this successful. And we're like, no, you can't leave. It's less than 2% of us. You have to, let's come together and provide support. And it ended up being 17 of us all together in this group. We could, established this organization called the Fellowship Black Male Educators for Social Justice. It was really fascinating to, during one of our meetings for us to all come to the realization that all 17 of us, we were from all around the country, but we were all working in Philadelphia. Not a single one of us had been invited into the profession until after we had graduated from college. And so for all those years, we just, it was not on our radar to do it. And the one, Will Hayes, he was actually discouraged. He was one out of the 17 who thought about it beforehand and was discouraged, and that he did not, revisit this opportunity until after graduating from college. But we asked our colleagues, that was the first thing, kind of informal study that we did. We asked our colleagues, most of them, as you can imagine, were white women. And we asked them, when did they have a conversation with an adult about becoming a teacher, leading their own classroom? The average response team was third grade. So when you think about that, third grade for one group, these young white women, after college graduation for us as Black men. And while it was a small sample size, as we've continued to engage Black men around the country, whether through our Black Male Educator convening, whether or otherwise, we're seeing that that's a pretty consistent theme, that people are not tapping young Black men, young Latino men on the shoulder early on and say, I can see you leading your own classroom. Or those leadership experiences that you're displaying, you would make a great teacher. And we should definitely begin those conversations much, much earlier to help infuse, more Black men and more Latino men to at least consider, what does it mean to have an impact by leading a classroom?
Why do you think that is? Like, what, when you think about that third grade experience versus that after college, like what are some factors you think at play?
I think, it's kind of a multi-tiered version. One, who do we typically see? 70% of public school teachers right now are white women. And so it automatically may reinforce to young students, whether it's a young, third grade white girl or a third grade Black boy. The Black boy may not have a Black male teacher to even envision himself. The civil rights icon, Marian Wright Edelman, would often say, it's hard to be what you can't see. And so sometimes they can't even imagine, and they just consider, well, it's a women-dominated profession and field, so it must be only for, those women. And not understanding like the history, there was actually more men teaching, that there are, and so that's part why we take, very, very, deep thought and practice into introducing our high school students to more Black educators, and including Black men. We're in February. Dr. Carter G. Woodson, while people know that he, created Black History Month for all intents and purposes, he was also a teacher and a principal. And he had competencies that he believed should be used and implemented in teaching Black children, right? And so introducing them to those competencies. Then also say the other part of this that is, is really heartbreaking, gut-wrenching, is that Black boys' experiences in school may also deter them from even considering returning as a teacher. Our good friend, Dr. Chris Emden, often says recruiting young Black men to become teachers, it could be akin to recruiting someone to return to the scene of a crime that was committed against themselves, right? And so if I have this kind of experience, then I'm less likely to consider that as a place for me. If I'm being, told that this is really not a place for you to find success, to find love, to find caring, to find accurate depictions of yourself in the coursework, it may not be. It may be a reflective of I'm rejecting you. So why instinctually would I think about returning? And so these are all factors that we have to consider as school and district leaders as we're shaping what's the school culture, environment, and curricula that can either support or undermine a diverse educator workforce.
Right, that's great. So much there in terms of nurturing classroom environments, nurturing school environments, representation in the field, representation in recruitment strategies. Who's on the poster for come teach here? All right, like these sort of small pilots we might run to learn more about how to at scale build out this pipeline. Let's talk about retention too, because retention is probably the other part of the pie, right? At 50%, I guess 50-50, you might say 50% get in the door, 50% stay. The survey seems to confirm what data have been showing for years, which is that Black teachers expect to leave the teaching profession sooner than teachers of other identities. And so if it's taking me a minute to sort of capture what's here, here in the audience, if you just zero in on the right-hand side of the screen, so just zero in on where you see 10 or more years, just look there at yellow. And we see here that there's something going on under the hood with respect to when it is or how long it is that Black teachers are thinking they'll stay in their profession. So let's see what's going on here. And maybe one aspect of retention might be around the teaching experience. So across all genders, we found that Black teachers are 3 times more likely than any other teachers of color to report that because of their race, they're expected to discipline students of color. And they're about twice as likely to report being expected to do extra mentoring of students of color and to teach colleagues about racism and to teach students about racism. What is your reaction to what you see here? Because there is a fine line, I think, between the expectation that's put here versus perhaps the other experience we saw earlier in the survey around the delight in terms of the closer experiences to perhaps students who look like you. What's your reaction to what you see here?
Yeah, I mean, this directly ties back into the invisible tax that you mentioned earlier. What is it? I would say, for some of our colleagues, it's not so invisible. It's pretty conspicuous, the tax that they bear as maybe the lone and lonely, Black teacher in their building, right? And so what the experience that we're hearing from countless Black teachers is very consistent with the survey that you all conducted, is that they often become case managers for all students who may look like them, even if they don't actually teach them. So it's this expectation that, well, you already automatically have a relationship because you share some cultural background, and it's none of our other colleagues' responsibility, non-Black colleagues' responsibilities to learn how to develop relationships. So to learn how to be more culturally proficient, it's an automatic, like, well, fix the child, but it takes the entire team to help fix the ecosystem, right? And so there's this disconnect of, well, why would I want to continue to stay here when you're not interested in my feedback about how do we all do, racial justice work, equity work is everyone's responsibility, not the teachers of color's single responsibility. And I've yet to meet teachers of color who are not interested in being a part of a team. What they reject is the idea that they should be the only ones raising issues that are complex and entrenched that may be negatively impacting not only their experience, but student achievement. And so their idea of like, no, this is everyone, this should be an all hands on deck, when often they're told like, no, it's really just your responsibility.
This reminds me of one of the contributors to this study is Dr. Travis Bristol, who his voice is not represented today, but his work certainly is. And a lot of his work around loners and groupers, I think, gets at this as well. What happens when you're the only Black man in the whole school? And I think I actually spoke to a couple of folks at your convening this past November in Philly, where they mentioned this exact idea of what it feels like and what the expectations are when you are the only and you see perhaps someone who looks like you walk on the hallway, what the expectations are on you. And so maybe I'll mention this too, because it gets at a different cut on a similar idea, which is male teachers of color, who agreed that racial and ethnic differences between students and teachers create tensions at, my school. They were more than 3 times as likely to also agree that because of their race, they're expected to be the school liaison to various families of color. And so to your point, you mentioned that some of these findings are really quantifying what it is that John King, who's the former U.S. Secretary of Education, has been calling this invisible tax, or sort of as branded this invisible tax that educators of color pay. And to talk more about this dynamic, I'll just maybe pause here, because in just a moment, we're going to talk at one more universal finding and just mention here with respect to experiencing job burnout. Sharif, is there anything on this slide that surprises you with respect to what Black teachers and what Black male teachers did not say with respect to experiencing job burnout? Is there anything on this slide that you think you want to leave the audience with on this question?
Yeah, this is another, really fascinating aspect of, the burnout. And one of the things I was just curious about, like, okay, who are the Black teachers, Black male teachers, who are they teaching? And why is it, that they're experiencing, less job burnout, and I think, back to a prior slide, like how they're choosing to spend some of their time when it's not leading a classroom. And I hope that people who are have not been classroom teachers can really appreciate that so much of your time is in a group setting. Your classrooms, that may have between 20 and 30 plus students. And so it's harder often to build deeper relationships with them in a period that's 45 minutes and then switching, or an hour and then switching classes. They may find the opportunity to get deeper, and finding this kind of level of responsibility, which is another reason why often Black men teachers are joining the profession, is because, as I mentioned earlier, I have to lift as I climb.
Yeah.
I have a social responsibility and desire to give back to my community. And they may find the opportunity to do that. And when that happens, then that may refuel them and re-energize them and give them, the additional oomph, so to speak, to continue the work. But I do believe that some of that direct connection with students and seeing their purpose, seeing their why manifest in the relationships with students and the students' growth, as well as the students' responses to them, right? And that affirmation that they receive directly from their students, because they're coming into their room, because they're spending this outside of classroom time with them, that may also have a correlation where we see less burnout and more time outside of the classroom with students. I believe is something that we should really take a deeper look at.
I'll also sort of posit one other nuance to this here, which I'm also hearing you say, and I received the most loving feedback, even from Dr. Bristol, on this question. I pushed hard for this question to make its way into the survey. And then I got some good qualitative feedback, which was the way this is phrased might actually not be the most responsive to how it is that perhaps Black male teachers talk about burnout. There are other ways in which we might have asked this question to get at what is underneath, are you burnt out? Because I imagine here, I wanted to, at first as a Black woman, I said, oh, that's seeing more burnout than Black men. There it is, you see it here, folks. And instead, Bristol said, well, wait a minute, perhaps the language of burnout is not actually how it is that a teacher or a Black survey respondent would respond here. Instead, if you ask 10 other questions related to this question, you might get at a different finding. And so I share that with the audience in the spirit of transparency. And if you're wondering the same as how might we have asked this question differently, I encourage you, when we get to the end of this presentation, you can dig into the full suite of survey questions, the full suite of analysis, and then pose to us additional ideas you might have or things we can ask of our educators.
Yeah, and Steen, can I just add a small example of that? When we're talking about, job burnout, that has a lot of different, connotations, as you mentioned. And one of the things that we're hearing from teachers is, it may not be job burnout, it may be colleague burnout. It may be supervisor burnout. I may not be tired of teaching my students, but the ecosystem that I'm a part of may be, frying my, my sensibilities. And the other aspect is almost this, we've been calling the trifecta experience, where Black teachers are often talking about, hey, not only am I experiencing racial biases through my colleagues and supervisors, but it's also reminding me of the experiences I had as a student in some of these same seats. And now I'm in a position of trying to protect students who look like me from policies that I experience, policies that I disagree with as a colleague, and I'm not finding success in communicating why these are problematic or racialized. And so that all of that together is like experience and ecosystem also has to be part of the calculus as we're thinking how to recruit, support, and retain educators of color.
I'm so happy you added that. I want to end on a positive note, because part of what this survey and this study is showing is the multiple sides of unique insights and unique burdens and unique value that these educators bring to the classroom for their students, and especially including students of color. And so for any of our Black male educators or allies that are in this virtual room, we want you to know that the finding that we see here really speaks to the power of having a great teacher, right? The power of having a teacher who inspires you. And so for the audience, I hope you're getting your questions ready, because we would love to hear what's on your mind with what you've heard today from myself and from Sharif about this study. But before we get to that question, which I see we do have a couple here, Sharif, tell us who or what inspired you to become a teacher?
Yeah, you know what? It's multifaceted. Looking back, I think my mother, who was a classroom teacher, and my Black teachers, I think they planted the seeds. Although I never saw myself leading a classroom, I never considered becoming a teacher until I was invited into the profession by Dr. Martin Ryder, a Black man educator here in Philadelphia, who actually, and it speaks to a point that you made earlier, he saw my activism in the community and said, that activism that I'm seeing, that would make a great teacher. And he would say the purest form of activism is actually teaching our children well. And that idea of like activism by leading a classroom and doing it well so inspired me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I hadn't thought about the activism from that angle, and the teaching from that angle. And I think I didn't reject it when I started thinking about it, because I think my mother, how she taught me, the plethora of Black teachers that I had in my elementary school, I think that is really what had those dormant seeds of what the Black teaching looked like started to really sprout. And so Dr. Martin Ryder, I think, watered those seeds and really pulled it out to when he invited me directly, invited me into the profession. And I joined as a career changer. I mean, it wasn't really a career. I was only a year or so out of college, but
Change that year of your life, huh?
yeah. At that time, I thought I was embarking on something, but it interrupted my path to law school to really say, you know what, teaching is actually what I want to do. And I'm so grateful that Dr. Martin Ryder, invited me into the profession and saw me as a leader that should lead a classroom of his own, which I gratefully and excitedly did.
And now an entire organization cultivating the next generation and the current generation of Black educators. Well done, Dr. Ryder.
The ripples continue.
I just want to, mention I've got some questions here, and also I want to shout out here. I'm seeing, I want to give a narrative. So LaShawn, I hear you mentioned I started teaching in Harlem during the 90s. And this was exactly why I wanted to go into teaching and the way that I show up for my babies. I love that. And here, am I going to ask you here, Sharif, to go into this question that we have here from another member of our audience. It says, how are Black male teachers defining mentoring outside of the academic instruction time? So I think this question is really maybe two-part. One part might be with respect to the study itself. Did we give any asterisk that sort of defines when we say mentoring, we mean ... And so the answer there is no. We actually had a list of questions in the survey, and we asked them to sort of indicate, the number or the hours, and we just put mentoring outside. So the exact question you saw here was the exact question that our teachers saw. So thank you for that question, but I am curious for you, Sharif, is there anything additional you can share around maybe what is contextualizing when a Black educator or any educator saw mentoring outside of academic instruction time, what that might look like? Maybe one or two examples.
Yeah, I mean, it could range anything from tutoring with a particular subject. It could range from support in how situation. It could be situationally. Like I remember as a teacher having to help a student navigate how to advocate for themselves, with another teacher, with another educator, with the administrator. I remember a young man came into school as a classroom teacher and visibly, upset and, pulling him to the side and learning that his grandmother had passed that morning. Mm-hmm. And he came to school all the way to some young student athletes who I introduced to Jerome Bettis, who used to play for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and watching Jerome Bettis play a one-on-one pickup basketball with my students. So it ranges from what does the student need in that moment? What kind of environment is inviting them to not only be there, but to be themselves, to learn, who am I, right? And I, of course, I had middle school as a teacher, and so it really depends age, grade, and experiences. But I would say mentoring, there's a whole continuum of what that means, but really centers on what does the student need, not only as us as professionals and elders, but also what is the student saying that they need.
Yeah.
Based off of what they're experiencing in life in the moment.
That's right. That's right. And thank you, Ashford Hughes, for that question. And I'm going to get to a few more that we have here. And that includes, this one will be directly for you, Sharif. As Black men, what needs to be our educational philosophy / ideology? Do you have a point of view on that?
Yeah, I do. And it's probably a little bit more complex, but we definitely have at the Center for Black Educator Development, we've been really pulling what are the competencies necessary, what are Black pedagogical frameworks that have been historically used that not only did not start here, but it stretched all the way back to the continent of Africa that may have been strained during the Middle Passage, but not broken, and have continued passing on, as I mentioned, Dr. Koso Lassane, who's also been gathering these competencies around like what are Black teaching traditions. But I would say, if in a nutshell, if I had to speak to, I would say one philosophy is like the Ella Baker servant leadership, orientation, like how Ella Baker thought about leadership. And because that's what we're doing in the classroom, even as we're talking to our high school youth, we're not just talking about teaching and content, we're actually talking about leading human beings, leading a classroom. And what does it mean? I mean, really having an orientation and a mindset around what type of leader we want to be. And we found that the servant leadership aspect is most consistent with traditional Black educational philosophies and theories. And so I would really, strongly look at Ella Baker and ask any leader, particularly educators, to really study her orientation, how she spoke about, and as she led many teenagers, right, through SNCC, and what was that work, and what were the theories and philosophies that she practiced and implemented. So that would be one, and then there are others, and I would encourage people to some of them are outlined in our on our website and things like that, but could be anything from ethics of care, like what does it mean, this idea of community, grounded in community, meaning as a teacher, I am not successful unless my students are successful, and my students are not successful unless I am successful. Building that type of community where it is a collective work, responsibility, and accountability to each other in a way that fosters love, support, and respect. And these are things that, like drawing from, and you can see this in, people who celebrate Kwanzaa can hear the collective work and responsibility out of that. And then there's the accountability part, right? So some of these are not like foreign to us as a people, as Black men, but they're like, honed, driven, and incorporated in curricula and pedagogical frameworks.
I always love hearing you speak about the centering of this Black teaching tradition. I think that's for anyone here who hopes that we can get one more of these sessions in the near future where we go deep. I would love to talk more about precisely what we mean by that. And our role at DonorsChoose and having access to scale is, let's then ask, let's ask 10,000 Black teachers how it is that they're engaging in this servant leadership. Another question here, and we'll take maybe 2 more questions and then we're going to close this out so everyone here can get to maybe have 2 more minutes in your Valentine's Day lunch. Knowing that many political leaders do not value the teaching profession in terms of finances, right? How do we grapple with, or how did you grapple with this idea of giving up the opportunity for a higher salary in law versus a lower salary in teaching? And how do we emphasize the importance of the teaching profession to those thinking about their financial well-being? And this comes from Sharetta Buford. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. I think this is one of those, I mentioned Mary Church Terrell, who is a Black educator who mentored thousands. And when she talked about this idea of lifting as we climb, I think that's exactly one of the reasons. When we look at, the financial impact of teaching, and what it means, but as well as the impact that they have on students. And so often when people are choosing that, they are weighing both options.
Right.
One of the ways that we at the Center for Black Educator Development has been approaching this is, one, aligning with colleagues in the field who are interested in raising salaries, for example. So an example of that is the Teacher Salary Project, where they are advocating for higher salaries. We have former U.S. Department of Ed secretaries who also champion it, researchers who are championing it. So joining a community of folks who are advocating. We also are transparent with our students. Not the, oh, woe is me, we don't get paid enough, but like, hey, here are the inconsistencies in school funding and education of children. And what does this mean? And what should it mean? And what do you think that your education or education writ large is worth in our communities? And so making sure that we're also including students in, and obviously age and grade appropriateness. But we, as a principal of a 7 through 12 building, we wanted to make sure that they were aware of the politics of education as well. And I think sometimes we try to protect students from so much that we actually shield what's actually the realities. And again, we didn't do it from oh, woe is me, a lot of hand wringing and sad singing. We wanted them to be empowered with information education, so much so that they actually asked us, can you help us get to the Capitol in Pennsylvania so that we can advocate with state legislators to about what we require and what we're asking for. And then I would say the third part is that we're doing not only as a principal, but now at the Center for Black Educator Development, is making sure our efforts to recruit and retain Black educators is not disconnected from the social, political, and economic realities of the teachers, right? And so these high school students who are taking our course, we also support them through paid apprenticeships in the summer, as they're teaching first, second, and third graders. So that's paid. People approached and said, oh, they should just volunteer. We said, no, that would be disconnected from economic realities. This is gonna be a paid apprenticeship. Then secondly, we offer a fellowship that includes scholarships and mentorships for kids going to college, because maybe they want to be a teacher, but there's a cost associated with that. They may be first gen, which means this is a new bill to their family. They may need support for graduating, matriculating through college. And then the third part of that aspect is that once they get to their 5th year of teaching, if they come through our fellowship, they get a retention bonus, a retention stipend, so to speak, that they can use for whatever they want, whether to pay down loans or just to supplement their, the salaries of early career teachers. So making sure that things are connected to the communal needs of people that we're trying to recruit and support is absolutely imperative. And there is a financial impact. And lastly, I would say in Philadelphia, Elevate 215 did a recent study on educators here in Philadelphia, and there was a stark difference with what would retain teachers. There's self-reporting. Here's what would keep me. And we saw that Black educators had a significantly higher loan debt for their college degree than other educators. And which means they had less spending power when they did receive a check. And that was impacting whether they would, if they saw themselves staying and for how long. It was the financial implications of what they were dealing with. We have to stay connected to people who are serving, so we know better how to serve them, support them.
Sharif, and Sharetta, your question is really getting at a nuance here, and Sharif was going beautifully into that nuance of what gets and keeps teachers in the profession, especially teachers who rightly so into the profession thinking there's two things that are important here, my students, but also myself, my financial well-being, the future I leave, the legacy, which is sometimes deeply rooted in I'll say I statements and my Black family, thinking about my family lineage as far as I can go back. There's sort of two main areas where I saw my family. Three. One was domestic workers, or sharecropping was all throughout. Then we had military, and then we had teaching. Right. So teaching is in my blood, and yet so much of that is a lot of the wealth did not come. There's not wealth in this idea, right? And so this idea of disrupting the idea that a teacher does not enter the classroom for fear that she will not have enough to sustain her well-being and her family's legacy is critical to talking about how it is that we keep and retain educators. And DonorsChoose truly is one area where I'd encourage continued conversation, how we think about Our founding by Charles Best in the year 2000 was because he was in the classroom and was concerned about teacher out-of-pocket spending. And so this idea, not of necessarily the salary itself coming from DonorsChoose, but the dollars not spent on resources out of your own pocket is an important part of how it is that DonorsChoose is playing a role in making education more equitable. You, Teacher Buford, should not be spending out of your own pocket. Neither should, I see the many other questions that we won't have time for here, should not be spending dollars out of your own pocket. And so I encourage you to take a peek at some of what you're going to see in just a moment around how it is that you can learn more about this work. And so my deep apologies in my moderation should have spent maybe 30 seconds per question. That's on me, Sharif, not you.
Oh, no, it's all good.
Else.
It's all good. Sorry about that. I was long-winded in some of my answers.
Okay, you heard it here. We can blame Sharif. No, I'm just kidding. So you all, thank you so much for tuning in. In our last 3 minutes, I just want to underscore putting all of these findings to work. We shared a high-level overview of today, as well as an overview of our organizations, DonorsChoose and the Center for Black Educator Development. All of this is an effort for us to recruit, retain, and also, I would say, empower Black male educators. Before we go, please take out your phones, scan this QR code. Sharif, is there anything here you would like the audience to know about the incredible work of the center?
Yeah, I think this captures, we're really proud of the work that the team, as well as our apprentices in high school and college have been doing. And what you'll see is not only our mission reflected in this, rebuilding the Black teacher pipeline, but our work across the 3 pillars: policy and advocacy, professional learning, and pathways. We call them the 3 Ps. You'll see that across the continuum, and also opportunities for calls to action of how to be involved and engage with us as we rebuild a national Black teacher pipeline.
Amen to that. It's a beautiful report. I've had the chance to read it, and our full team has as well. And here's where you can find the full report that we talked about today. So Sharif and I maybe covered 10 out of what is likely 30.
It's small for that, yeah.
So much more. We encourage you to take a peek here. And if there are any educators in the room as well, I encourage you to, when you land on this page, to then toggle over to creating your own classroom product on DonorsChoose. Or if you're an ally of an educator in the space, I encourage you to share DonorsChoose with a colleague, because what's most important to us is that we continue to make our education system more equitable. We continue to make sure that teachers have access to the resources that they need, that their students need. And the work that you witnessed today is the sum total of teacher by teacher by teacher joining the DonorsChoose community. And as a part of this, we can now begin to really lean into all the things that we can do to support educators at scale. So again, I'll give you just one more second to scan this QR code before I leave you with this. I want to just give gratitude to all of our Black male educators in this virtual room. I want to pay homage to both my parents, who were educators, one of students with special needs, my dad in the military space at ROTC, Black man in the classroom. I salute you, Daddy, if you're listening. I salute you, Mom, if you're listening. I salute all of the folks in the space for all that you do. Sharif, my brother in crime, I appreciate you. And until next time.